My name is Mike, and the story I am about to tell you happened just last year. It was supposed to be the happiest time of our lives. My fiance and I had finally saved enough money to buy our first starter home. We are an Asian couple, and I mention that right away because, unfortunately, it becomes the central reason for the horror we endured. It was a small, two-story house in a basic suburban town in Georgia. Nothing fancy, nothing extravagant, just a quiet street with decent backyards and cheap wooden fences. To us, it was a palace. We felt so lucky to even own property at our age. But that excitement was robbed from us almost immediately. The first few days were deceptive. We unpacked boxes, met the friendly older couple to our right, and waved to the guy across the street. But the house to our left was different. It was like a black hole in the neighborhood. The curtains were always drawn tight, sealing the inside from the world. Even though a car sat in the driveway, the house felt abandoned, dark, and lifeless. One afternoon, while carrying groceries, my fiancé nudged me and whispered, "Look at the window." I glanced over at the house on the left. Standing behind the heavy curtain was a man. He was only half visible, a shadow in the gloom, but he was watching us intently. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. The moment our eyes met, he simply dissolved back into the darkness of his living room. We tried to brush it off. Some people are just private, right? But over the next week, the watching intensified. Every time I left for work, I'd see his silhouette in the downstairs window. My fiancée caught him staring from the second floor while she checked the mail. He was like a ghost, always there, but never staying long enough to be caught. The escalation and the apology. One night around midnight, the passive watching turned into something active. I was walking past our upstairs bedroom window, which faced directly toward his house. Out of habit, I glanced across the narrow gap between our properties. There he was, not hidden behind a curtain this time, not a shadow. He was standing fully visible in his illuminated window, staring straight into our bedroom. His face was blank, his posture rigid. I froze, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then realizing I had seen him, he stepped back into the shadows. I nervously laughed and told my fiancé, "Great, our neighbor is a creep." The next morning, however, took a weird turn. A knock came at our door. It was him. He introduced himself as Gordon. He was polite, smiling a little too much, and apologized profusely. He claimed he was just placing something on his window ledge and didn't mean to pry. His smile seemed welcoming enough to lower my guard, though my gut told me something was off. We accepted the apology, wanting to keep the peace. But peace was not what he wanted. A week later, in the dead of night, my fiancée shook me awake. She whispered that she heard footsteps in our backyard. I dragged myself out of bed, playing the role of the protector, and looked out the window. My blood ran cold. There was a full-grown man walking through our grass, pacing like he was hunting for something. I shouted, "Hey!" through the glass. The figure bolted, slamming the gate shut behind him. We were terrified, but didn't call the police yet, thinking maybe it was a one-time thing. We were wrong. The dinner party and the attack. A few nights later, the intruder returned. We heard the distinct sound of someone fiddling with a lock. I looked out, and this time, Under the moonlight, I recognized the face. It was Gordon. I yelled his name, but he ignored me and walked away. I had enough. I marched over to his house and banged on the door. He answered immediately, fully dressed, with that same fake smile. He laughed it off, claiming he was chasing kids who were jumping fences. He said, "You'll get used to it," but his eyes didn't match his smile. There was a cold, sharp hate behind them. I walked away, knowing he was lying. The next day, in a bizarre twist, he invited us over for a peace offering dinner, Chinese food. We accepted, desperate to normalize the relationship. Walking into his house felt like walking into a trap. The air was thick and stale. Gordon was already intoxicated, sipping wine aggressively. He made a point to say, "I know you people love Chinese food," followed by a laugh that lasted too long. As the night went on and the wine bottles emptied, his mask slipped. The passive-aggressive comments turned into direct insults. He started ranting about how the town used to be better, how it had a history of being white. He got louder, angrier, his face turning red. Finally, he admitted it. He told us he was in our yard. He screamed that we weren't welcome here, that this neighborhood wasn't for people like us. We fled his house, locking our doors, hearts pounding. We asked other neighbors, and they confirmed Gordon was a bitter drunk, abandoned by his wife years ago. We tried to ignore him, but you can't ignore hate living 10 feet away. The finale came one night when a brick shattered our living room window. Glass exploded everywhere. No note, just a brick. We knew it was him. The police came, but Gordon denied everything, acting like a confused old man. Without video proof, they couldn't arrest him. The fear was suffocating. We realized we could either stay and wait for something worse than a brick, or we could leave. We chose life. We packed up and moved out less than 2 months after arriving. I firmly believe that if we had stayed, you would be hearing about our murders on the news right now. This story dates back to late 2021. My name is Noah, and at the time, my fiancée Gabby, who is now my wife, and I had just moved into a beautiful 2-story house. It was the picture-perfect suburban dream, manicured lawns, chirping birds, and seemingly wonderful neighbors. The couple to our right, Daniel and Veronica, were especially welcoming. They appeared to be in their late 30s. To welcome us, they baked a homemade red velvet cake and brought it to our door. It was delicious, and looking back, it makes me sick to think about how kind they seemed. For the first few weeks, everything was idyllic until the cracks started to show. It began with sounds. One night around 11 p.m, I heard shouting, harsh, angry yelling coming from Daniel and Veronica's house. I looked out, but couldn't see anything. Eventually, I saw Veronica storm out to her car and speed off into the night. We figured it was just a marital spat. Every couple fights, right? But later that week, as we were coming home, we heard it again. Screaming. The main door was open, and through the screen, we could hear the rage in Daniel's voice. It was unsettling, but we followed the golden rule of suburbia. Mind your own business. The disappearance. Then, the silence began. Veronica's car wasn't in the driveway. A few days turned into a week turned into 2. Veronica was gone. My wife suspected divorce, especially after the fighting we had heard, but something about Daniel changed. He was still there, but he became elusive. He stopped waving. If I caught him outside, he would rush back indoors, avoiding eye contact. He looked disheveled, stressed. After 3 weeks of not seeing Veronica, curiosity and a growing sense of dread got the better of me. Against my fiance's advice, I walked over to check on him. I rang the doorbell. I knew he was home. I could hear movement. It took him 3 long minutes to answer. When he finally opened the door, he looked like a wreck. He was drenched in sweat, breathing heavy, his eyes darting around nervously. I asked him where Veronica was. He stuttered, giving me a rehearsed answer. She's with her mum, out of state. Her mum is sick. It felt like a lie. The air coming from the house smelled weird, stale. I asked why he was sweating so much. He claimed he was working out upstairs. Then it happened. A sound that still haunts me. A muffled scream. It was faint, coming from deep inside the house, but it was unmistakably a woman's voice crying for help. My stomach dropped. I asked, "What was that?" Daniel's eyes went wide. He stammered, "Oh, I left a movie playing upstairs. Forgot to pause it." A movie? He just said he was working out. I nodded slowly, backing away, saying I'd catch him later. I walked calmly back to my house, but inside I was panic-stricken. The horrifying truth. I told Gabby everything. She told me to call the cops immediately. I did, requesting a welfare check anonymously, though I knew Daniel would suspect me. 10 minutes later, the quiet street lit up with red and blue lights. 5 police cars and an ambulance swarmed the driveway. We watched from our window as officers kicked down the door. Moments later, they dragged Daniel out in handcuffs. Then paramedics rushed in with the stretcher. They brought Veronica out. She was alive, but barely. We later learned the horrific truth. Daniel hadn't been working out. He had been keeping Veronica prisoner in a soundproofed basement we didn't even know existed. He had been abusing her for weeks. When I knocked on the door, she had tried to scream. To silence her, he had stabbed her 5 times before answering my knock. That was why he was sweating. That was why he took 3 minutes to answer. Tragically, Veronica passed away a few hours later at the hospital. As the police shoved Daniel into the cruiser, he looked directly at me standing on my porch. He screamed, "I know it was you. You'll regret this." Those words dug into my psyche. A few nights later, the trauma manifested in a nightmare so vivid, I thought it was real. I woke up in the dark and saw a silhouette standing at the foot of my bed. It was Daniel. He held a knife, grinning. He whispered, "I told you you'd regret this." He lunged at me and I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. Even though we moved to a new town after getting married, the knowledge that we lived next to a monster, eating his cake, shaking his hand while he was capable of such evil, is something that never truly leaves you. My name is Devon, and this story takes place 2 years ago in Queens, New York. I was 24, living in an old duplex. The house was split right down the middle. I rented the left side, and a stranger rented the right. I never saw him. The landlord said he worked nights and kept to himself. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, sharing a wall with the neighbor's bedroom. The wall was old and thin. If I pressed my ear against the plaster, I could hear the faint sounds of his life on the other side. For the first week, it was peaceful. I was just happy to have my own place in the city. But then, the noises began. One night, while scrolling on my phone, I heard a voice. It wasn't a normal speaking voice. It was high-pitched, almost falsetto, mumbling incoherently. It sounded like a man trying to mimic a cartoon character or a child. It was coming from right behind my headboard, through the wall. I froze, listening. I assumed he was on the phone or watching a weird show. Eventually, it stopped, but a few nights later, it returned, louder. I pressed my ear to the wall. It didn't sound like a conversation. It sounded like a monologue. He was talking to himself in that disturbing, screeching whisper. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to drown it out. I realized then that I didn't like being alone there. The knocking 2 weeks in, the physical contact started. I was drifting off to sleep when tap, tap. 2 distinct knocks on the wall directly beside my ear. I flinched so hard I nearly fell out of bed. I sat in silence, heart hammering. Tap, tap. He was knocking back. He knew I was there. I didn't knock back. I was too scared to acknowledge him. Over the next week, it became a ritual. Soft knocks, hard bangs. Always when I was in bed. One night I put on headphones, blasting white noise just to get some sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about how close he was. Just 6 inches of drywall separated my head from his. Then came the night that shattered my sanity. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, eyes closed. 3 slow knocks. Then, the voice. It wasn't mumbling this time. Through the wall, clear as day, that high-pitched voice whispered, "What are you doing in there?" My body went rigid, my lungs seized. He wasn't just crazy. He was listening to me. He was interacting. I grabbed my phone and called my boyfriend, whispering that I was terrified. He came over and stayed the night. Of course, the neighbor stayed silent while he was there. It made me feel insane, like I was imagining the danger. The intruder. A few days of silence passed, and I let my guard down. I shouldn't have. I was deeply asleep one night when something snapped me awake. Adrenaline flooded my system before I even opened my eyes. I sat up. The tapping started again. Fast, rhythmic drumming on the wall. Tap, 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 tap. It was aggressive. Without thinking, my fear turned into anger. I screamed at the wall, "Leave me alone!" I was shaking, breathing hard in the dark. I waited for the voice from the wall, but the response didn't come from the wall. From the corner of my own bedroom, in the pitch-black darkness, a deep, guttural voice said, "Go to sleep." It wasn't the high-pitched voice. It was his real voice, and he was inside my room. I didn't think. I didn't look. I launched myself off the bed and sprinted. I flew down the stairs, tore open the front door, and ran barefoot onto the cold pavement, screaming for help. I didn't stop until a neighbor 2 houses down came out. He saw my terror and told me to call the police. I stood on his sidewalk, shivering, staring back at my dark house until the lights of the patrol car appeared. The police searched the house. They found no one, no forced entry. They asked if I had unlocked the door as I ran out. I didn't remember. Maybe I did, or maybe he had a key. Maybe he had been coming in for weeks. The police knocked on the neighbor's door. No answer. Silence. My boyfriend picked me up and I never slept in that house again. I broke my lease the next day. My landlord later told me the guy next door moved out suddenly in the middle of the night, leaving everything behind. I still don't know how he got in, but I know what I heard. He wasn't behind the wall that night. He was watching me sleep